Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something deeply personal. I'm Alara, and I'm inviting you directly into my own memoir. We're going to explore the mechanics of human connection, looking back at my memories of a city that was, quite literally, suffocating under the weight of an invisible loneliness.
So, have you ever carried sorrow like a secret stone right in your chest? Just take a second and imagine the sheer psychological weight of that. Imagine living in this sprawling, chaotic city surrounded by millions of people, constant noise, constant motion, and yet feeling profoundly, entirely unseen. That was the daily reality for my city. Everyone passing you on the street was lugging around this heavy secret, right? A silent burden that absolutely nobody else knew about. It was honestly like a pandemic of isolation.
We lived in this incredibly stark divide. On crowded trains, people would smile, politely brush shoulders in elevators, but when night fell, they cried completely alone. We were so close physically, neighbors literally sharing walls, but we never, ever shared our pain. And I was just this quiet observer of all this silent suffering. I watched it day after day from my tiny antique shop right beside the old river. I rarely spoke, but I listened. I paid deep attention to the quiet sighs and the averted eyes of every single person who walked through my door.
But everything changed for me on this one freezing winter evening. An old man slowly pushed open the door to my shop, bringing this huge gust of cold air with him. And in his trembling hands, he was tightly gripping a broken pocket watch. He looked at me, and his eyes, they were just so full of years of unspoken hurt. Then he whispered a secret he hadn't told anyone. He told me his wife had passed away 3 years ago, but every single night, he still set the dinner table for two.
As he was speaking, the single tear rolled down his weathered cheek and fell right into my outstretched hand. But here's the thing, it didn't vanish, it didn't soak into my skin. Right before my eyes, it actually hardened into this tiny crystal droplet. It glowed softly, kind of like moonlight. But what I remember most, what was so absolutely shocking, was the feeling of it. It radiated this heavy, pulsing warmth. It literally felt like holding a living, breathing ember of his grief right against my skin. It didn't burn, but it was incredibly dense, packed with a lifetime of longing and love. It was his sorrow, made completely physical.
That first tear was really just the catalyst, because unknowingly, I became the keeper of strangers' pain. The very next day, I found a heartbroken little girl sobbing outside a hospital because her mom had promised to come home and, never did. When her tear fell, a crystal formed. Then, shortly after, I collected glowing crystals from a mourning soldier who'd lost his brother. Days later, from an abandoned woman and a boy who was bullied just for being different. Every sincere tear turned to crystal. And before I knew it, my small shop was completely packed with glass jars, all filled with these warm, glowing stones of sorrow.
Now, I'm not gonna lie, at first, looking at all those glowing jars, I genuinely thought I was cursed. It felt like I was hoarding the concentrated heartbreak of the entire city. The physical weight of that warmth in my shop was almost suffocating. But then, one night, an old blind woman visited my shop. She sensed the burden I was carrying, she just smiled, and she said this to me: "Pain shared with love becomes a bridge." Take a second to let that sink in. That one statement completely shifted my entire existence. Suddenly, the glowing warmth I had been guarding had this beautiful, urgent purpose.
To really grasp why this was so crucial, you kind of have to understand the geography of our isolation. Our city was deeply, deeply fractured. We were split right down the middle by that abandoned river near my shop. On one side, you had extreme wealth and dominant religions. On the other, crushing poverty and totally different languages. And people actively avoided crossing it. But honestly, it wasn't because we lacked a physical path. The river was symbolic. We fundamentally lacked trust. We were completely separated by this entrenched fear of the unknown.
So, following the blind woman's guidance, I started this quiet, nightly mission that absolutely nobody else knew about. Every single evening, I lugged those heavy jars down to the riverbank and carefully placed thousands of those warm, glowing crystals directly out over the water. And then, something miraculous happened. The Sara started fusing together. Each crystal, carrying all that heartbreak, loss, fear, and love, locked into the next one, actually finding strength in their shared vulnerability. Until finally, this massive, glowing silver structure emerged across the divide, shining brighter than the moon. I was quite literally building a bridge out of human sorrow.
You can just imagine the scene when the sun finally came up. The whole city gathered at the riverbanks in absolute shock. The morning light was hitting the crystal structure, illuminating the collective pain of thousands of people.
No one had a clue who built it or where it came from. They just saw this breathtaking, impossible bridge spanning the divide that had separated them for generations. For the longest time, nobody even moved. They were terrified. But then, super hesitantly, led by this one brave little kid whose curiosity just outweighed the prejudice, people began to step onto it.
And as they stepped onto the bridge, walking right over those glowing crystals, this profound shift happened in their consciousness. Now, they didn't magically hear each other's private, spoken thoughts. It wasn't telepathy or anything like that. Instead, they began physically feeling one another's pain. They felt that exact same heavy, ember-like warmth I had held in my palms, but inside their own hearts. This created an immediate connection, leading to a pure understanding without any words. It was just raw, unfiltered empathy flowing directly from one soul to another.
This transformation was instant and just devastatingly beautiful. It was a true empathy awakening. A wealthy businessman walking the bridge suddenly felt the crushing, hollow loneliness of a homeless man passing by. A famously cruel teacher suddenly experienced the sheer terror and racing heartbeat of a bullied child. A grieving mother felt the exact same unbearable silence echoing in the home of a total stranger who had also lost a child. Arguments literally melted into quiet conversations. Decades of entrenched hatred softened into genuine compassion, the absolute moment people truly felt the inner battles of those they'd spent years judging.
But, as with all profound things, this magic came with a cost. As more and more people crossed and connected, getting closer to one another, a physical reaction kicked in. The act of empathy actually absorbed the sorrow that was powering the bridge. Every single time someone truly understood another's pain, a little bit of that pain healed and its heavy energy lifted from the crystals. So slowly, day by day, that glowing silver structure began to fade, flicker, and weaken right under their feet.
Eventually, one night, I realized the bridge was on the absolute verge of disappearing completely. The citizens rushed around my shop in a panic, practically begging me to rebuild it, to save this fading miracle that brought them together. But I just touched the dimming crystals and smiled gently at them. I had to explain that human connection is not built from magic. It's not just some permanent structure you passively walk across. It takes real effort. It's an active, daily choice to shoulder one another's burdens. Connection happens when people actually dare to reach out and carry each other's pain.
The very next sunrise, the bridge finally gave way. It completely dissolved, breaking apart into thousands of glowing particles that just floated up into the dawn sky like fading stars. Yet, the change, that endured. Even without the physical bridge, the behavior survived. Neighbors were talking over their fences again. Broken families were finally doing the hard work to heal. Strangers were smiling warmly at each other on the street. The city was forever transformed because, well, once you truly, deeply feel someone else's suffering, you can never look at them as a stranger again.
Looking back on the heavy warmth of those crystals in my palms, the greatest lesson of my entire life's journey became so intensely clear. Our deepest wounds do not signify weakness. Society is always telling us to hide our pain, right? To bury our secret stones so we look invincible. But actually, those wounds are simply reminders that every human heart is fighting invisible battles. They are literally the fabric of our shared human strength. When we take that shared pain and we choose to meet it with open compassion, that is exactly when our communities become incredibly resilient, connected, and powerful.
So, as I wrap up sharing this deeply personal explainer with you today, I really want to leave you with one final thought to carry back into your own bustling, crowded lives. Who will you dare to truly understand today? Because, as we've seen, the shortest, most unbreakable bridge between two souls isn't always joy or happiness. Sometimes the most direct path is shared pain met with deep compassion. So I ask you, whose invisible sorrow will you choose to acknowledge today? Thank you so much for joining me and for walking across this bridge with me today.